George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
A happy new year, I suppose. It's certainly not happy in Gaza, where blood is running in the streets. 4 minutes ago in Rafah, yet another massacre has taken place. Rafah is the border with Egypt, where Israel has driven a very substantial proportion of the Gaza population towards. It ain't a happy new year in Jerusalem, where Christian and Muslim Palestinians alike are under relentless attack, their property destroyed and confiscated. It's not a happy new year in the West Bank, where hundreds of people have been murdered by Israeli soldiers and settlers since October 7. And there's no Hamas in the West Bank. It's not a happy new year in Lebanon, in Syria. It's not a happy new year in Iran, where an ocean of blood was let by you-know-who just this afternoon. I had hoped to be bringing you the list of Epstein's clients. They have not committed suicide. They're still there, but they're still busily trying to suppress their names and associations with the paedophilic child trafficker and his paramour. But it's all coming up tonight here on the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
War, famine, pestilence, and disease, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, are riding hard across Gaza even as we speak. In the last few minutes, an horrific massacre has taken place at Rafah, a little town I know well. The border between Gaza and Egypt, almost always locked on the orders of Israel and complied with by, well, a compliant Egyptian government. If it were not compliant, it wouldn't be the government, if you get my drift. A huge number of Palestinians are sleeping out in the streets of Rafah. I'm talking scores of thousands of families lying out on the cold earth in this January weather. And yet another massacre has now been visited upon them. If we get more news, pictures of that, we will, of course, bring them to you. But the World Food Programme has just warned that 5/6 of all the people in the world suffering acute food shortage this day are in Gaza. Famine is being deliberately engendered as a weapon of war. Disease is spreading so fast that even the Israeli invasion force has begun to catch it. All kinds of exotic fungal diseases that they have never seen or experienced before are being caught even by the invaders. Imagine what the emaciated, hungry, cold, and homeless Palestinian people are now host to. In fact, an epidemic is exactly what Israel is hoping for. That's why they destroyed the water supply after they cut it off in the first hours of the post-October 7th invasion. They deliberately destroyed the health system, deliberately disabling effectively all of Gaza's hospitals. A people of 2.3 million are now being bombed in a tiny cage in which there are no effective hospitals left. The power, of course, has gone. The water supply has gone, and the deliberate targeting of the sewage system is all about trying to fan the flames of epidemic on top of the flames of ceaseless bombardment by the world's most terrifying and expensive weaponry, given gratis to Netanyahu by Joe Biden, about whom much more later. War, famine, pestilence, disease are all now taking a grip of the vulnerable, the children in particular, in the Gaza Strip. But the war goes on. The Israeli invasion force is being contested every step of the way. And all that we are able to see from the Palestinian side, because, well, frankly, it's so bad you don't see much from the Israeli side. The war is not going well for the invaders. I'll be asking one of the country's most eminent experts, Dr. Andreas Krieg, later in the show, about exactly why Israel has redeployed thousands of its soldiers out of the north of the Gaza Strip, having paid dearly in blood, their own blood, as well as, of course, a very much larger amount of Palestinian blood to occupy in the first place. In Jerusalem, the Armenian Christian community came under mass assault on Christmas Day. Yes, on Christmas Day, by masked settlers. We assumed they were settlers. They could have been soldiers who are attempting to seize Armenian Christian property in the old city of Jerusalem. A timeless battle has been going on all of the 50 years I've been involved in this cause of Palestine, interested in the Israel-Palestine conflict, with a very clear side, of course, but interested in the Armenian and the broader Christian population in Jerusalem. And in that 50 years, more and more of the Christian population in the old city of Jerusalem have been extirpated, have been ethnically cleansed and driven out. And that continues even on Christmas Day. The West Bank has become, well, a carnage. It has actually seen a gigantic expansion in the activities of settlers and soldiers, usually working openly and visibly in tandem with each other, as more land is seized for what Israel itself, the state itself, has described as an industrial level of new settlements in the Palestinian territories designated by the Oslo Agreement, which your government signed up to. Your government, my government, all governments signed up to a Palestinian state in the West Bank, which is being concreted by Israeli settlement expanded on an industrial level. Hundreds, I think 325 was the last figure I saw. 325 Palestinians have been murdered in the West Bank, where there is no Hamas, where the, how shall I put it, Western ally, President Abbas, is nominally in charge. But the Israeli forces sweep in and murder people. They seize homes, they demolish homes, they seize settlements and begin constructing upon them. It's no happy new year in Beirut, where Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, Said Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the Party of God, Hezbollah, has just spoken live in, again, the last few minutes. The egregious, criminal, cross-border assassination by Israel of one of the leaders of Hamas living there in the center of Beirut, from which, incidentally, reportedly, he was the point man for the facilitating of the release of Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. He was the point man between Israel and the Hamas top leaders living in Qatar. So they clearly have decided to go for broke in every way by killing the man that was helping to get their hostages released. They clearly have abandoned their hostages. Well, we kind of knew that when they gunned down their own hostages, naked, carrying a white flag, speaking in Hebrew, with red hair and red beard. We kind of knew they didn't care about their hostages when they murdered them in Gaza after a group of them had escaped. But by killing Aruri, the deputy in Hamas, the man responsible for hostage negotiations, they have clearly signed a death warrant for their own hostages, their own Israeli citizens. But that too should not be surprising, as more and more evidence, testimony emerges about just how many of the people killed on October 7 in Israel were in fact killed by Israel, by its armed forces, its helicopter gunships, its tanks, its gunners, artillery, and infantry soldiers are now appearing almost daily on Israeli television to say how traumatized, horrified they are because they were ordered by their officers to effectively massacre their own citizens under what's called the Hannibal Directive, by which Netanyahu decrees that no Israeli must be taken prisoner. They should be killed rather than allowed to become prisoners, precisely because of the political leverage that taking prisoners gave the otherwise hopelessly outgunned Palestinian resistance fighters. More of that with considerable experts in the region later. The killing of Aruri is, of course, an international crime. Lebanon has the right to defend itself. It has the right to retaliate. Lebanon, if it were to launch an attack on Tel Aviv this evening, would be acting entirely lawfully. But the Israelis count on the fact that that will not happen. They may be counting rather complacently as the number of their crimes against neighboring countries intensifies and multiplies. I've no idea who Aruri was. I'd never heard of him before. I've no idea how important he was to Hamas. But however important, I know that he will have been replaced before his body was placed in the ground. It is abundantly clear from all the other people that Israel has assassinated that these assassinations achieve absolutely nothing. Sheikh Yassin, the founder of Hamas, was assassinated. His successor, Rantisi, was assassinated. Yasser Arafat was assassinated. Abu Ali Mustafa was assassinated. Did that end Israel's problems? Did that mean that the Palestinian resistance forces, factions, ran out of new leaders? That the people lost heart and abandoned their struggle? Of course, the very opposite is true. By the way, in every single one of those assassinations I just adumbrated, the guy who came next was more of a problem for Israel than the devil that they knew. Something I warned many times when I said, deal with President Arafat. Make an agreement with President Arafat, because after President Arafat comes the deluge, and all of that came to pass. But the murder of Aruri in Beirut was, of course, coming hard on the heels of the murder of an Israeli general, an Iranian general in Damascus. Israel murdered him too. A second attack on a neighboring sovereign country, member state of the United Nations. They openly murdered this Iranian general who was advising the Syrian armed forces in Damascus when he was murdered. Now, they hope, maybe believe, that Syria, that Lebanon, for fear of triggering the wider war, which Israel clearly wants, will not retaliate or will bide their time before retaliation. It may be hoped in Western capitals that this will be so, that Hezbollah will allow itself to be humiliated, reduced to making fiery speeches with no real fire, at least commensurate with the crime that has been committed against them. This man was murdered whilst a guest of Hezbollah. Anybody who knows anything about Arab and Islamic culture knows that that's a very, very serious problem for the amour propre, for the honor of an Islamic resistance movement. Nasrallah didn't give much away this evening, except to say that revenge will be swift and it will be severe. We'll see, and keep that under review here on the mother of all talk shows. But the crime that was committed in Iran today is equally clearly designed to bring about the wider war, which is the only kind of war that Israel can hope to prevail within, can hope to gain any advantage from. After all, the current war in the north against Hezbollah and in the Gaza Strip is costing them an arm and a leg, literally and metaphorically. Huge numbers of their soldiers are being killed and wounded, maimed in that conflict. But it's also costing their economy. An economy never all that robust, entirely dependent on American private and public subvention to fund the lifestyle that they have, which is far better than the lifestyle enjoyed by your average American taxpayer, by the way. Israel has all the things American citizens don't have, like free health care, like free university education, all paid for by you mugs down on Main Street in Peoria and in Philadelphia. You mugs are funding a lifestyle on the Mediterranean for 7 million people, which leaves, if I may put it this way, your own lifestyle in the shade. But all of that is imperiled as the cost to the Israeli economy of this particular war is beginning to be counted by the markets and by the credit markets in particular. But what happened today in Kerman, in Iran, could scarcely be of more grave consequence and potential for that wider war that Israel wants, that Iran and Hezbollah have been trying to avoid. The general, Hajj Soleimani, has a shrine. This is the 4th anniversary of his murder by Donald Trump. An egregious murder of a man who had done more to destroy ISIS in the region than any number of armies of the so-called Western allies that purported, at least, to wish the end of ISIS. Soleimani brought about the end of ISIS. He was the hammer of ISIS. So Donald Trump murdered him 4 years ago. Today, tens of thousands of people flocked to his shrine in the city of Kerman, his hometown, in order to pay tribute to a national and Islamic hero. For them, he is of entirely heroic capacities. And somebody blew up 2 IEDs in amongst the crowd and has murdered hundreds of Iranian citizens there for the commemoration of the murder of their national hero. The death toll is rising by the hour. The last one I saw was now well over 200 dead and well over 500 seriously wounded. The local hospital has become entirely overwhelmed. Now, who carried out that crime? Well, I'm no Inspector Poirot, but j'accuse Benjamin Netanyahu and Joe Biden. I'll be right back after a short break with 2 of the very best guests you have ever seen. Stay tuned. It's the Mother of All Talk. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Now you have the right of reply, because this is the Open University of the Airwaves. If you want to have your say, here are the numbers to call. They are entirely free of charge. If you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's 08 081 96 5522. If you're in the rest of the world, it's 0044 203 966 2625. And we're running a poll because I fully intended adumbrating the highlights or lowlights of the Jeffrey Epstein client list, because that was supposed to have been already released. But a Jane Doe, I wonder who she was. Jane Doe went to court in a last-minute bid to suppress her name and her relationship to Jeffrey Epstein. And so we'll have to wait till the 22nd of January now to get that list, if we ever get it. It may die in its cell. It may hang itself in its cell by paper sheets, if you get my drift. Were Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell Israeli spies? Yes or no? is the question. 18,280 people have already voted, and, well, let's just say it doesn't look good for the grotesque, grisly duo. Dr. Andreas Krieg has, if you'll forgive the pun, had a good war. He has been on multiple television channels, giving quite the clearest, the most concise, and the wisest analysis of any of the commentators that I have seen. He is an author, he's a professor at King's College, no less, and an expert on violence and warfare in the Middle East. And I'm glad to say we have him with us now. Dr. Krieg, thank you for joining us. I'm a big admirer of your work. Let me ask you first, if I may, what was the meaning of Israel's assassination of Aruri? What did they intend or hope to gain from that?
Thank you very much for having me. Very kind words. Look, I think it was an act of vengeance, as much of what we've seen coming out of Israel in the last 2-3 months has been about vengeance. It was never really about trying to find a solution to any problem. It was an act of vengeance against an individual who the Israelis considered to be instrumental in the 7th of October attack, someone who they see as a liaison, someone who connects Hamas to Hezbollah as well as to the Iranian regime. And in that respect, they thought it would be now a good time to get rid of him, which I think is obviously very, very, quite stupid to do, considering the context where we're in, considering how tense the relations are anyway, how tense the northern border is, and where the Americans have hoped actually to move on and say leaving the region in calmer waters. The Israelis are now escalating again in a strike that I think was being completely counterproductive, as you said in your opening words. Quite correctly. I mean, Hamas is a network. Hezbollah is a network. The resistance movements are networks. If you all of these networks, like Al Qaeda, like ISIS, like all these network non-state actors, if you take one of them out, all these decapitation strikes, we've done it for 25 years, and every single time we, and I mean mostly also Western countries as well, have taken out these sort of leaders, they've been replaced imminently with someone else who, as you rightly say, was usually more radical than the previous one. So very counterproductive. So I can't see any sort of military sense in what they were doing. It's not something that will in any way weaken Hamas, weaken Hezbollah, or weaken the resistance movement. So I can only explain this as an eye for an eye sort of act of vengeance, of a retribution, and also potentially sending a message of deterrence. But obviously also deterrence has failed for the most part. And again, none of these decapitation strikes have ever led to effective deterrence.
The Mossad, on its official Twitter account, actually put out a very beautiful picture of Beirut with the words Beirut before. This is just this evening they did that. Clearly an attempt to say that's before, but there may be an after. How badly does Israel want a war with Lebanon? Because there must be a limit to what the Hezbollah can tolerate without really joining the war. I mean, they're in the war. They're tying down Israeli divisions. They're costing the Israeli economy a lot. They have lost 143 Hezbollah martyrs since October 7th. But given that Hezbollah has 130,000 missiles, well, they're definitely not really in the war yet, are they?
Absolutely right. They have kept it somewhat below the threshold of full escalation. And it's been a tit-for-tat war that's been going on now for 3 months. And Iran has been in this kind of Cold War situation with Israel for the last couple of years, where neither side really wanted to escalate. What Israel has done yesterday was an escalation. That is a clear breach of the boundaries of what was somewhat the agreement of where both sides were kind of playing that game. So Hezbollah will have to respond one way or the other. The thing is, though, they've killed a Palestinian. So they didn't kill a senior Hezbollah leader. So that means Hezbollah doesn't need to respond immediately. But he was obviously under Hezbollah hospitality and protection, and he was killed within a Hezbollah stronghold. So they need to respond to that. But usually Hezbollah and Iran have proven to be far more strategic, particularly in their patience as well as how they choose their targets. And they usually respond not instantly, but with a sort of delay. So we will probably see a response later on. And Hezbollah doesn't have an interest in making this war more than what it is now. And there are quite a lot of people in Israel who would like to use the opportunity of saying the world is against us anyway. We're in this existential war. That's how it has been framed domestically for the Israeli audience. Although, if you think about it, it's really laughable to see this as an existential war for Israel, considering the wars that Israel has fought over the last 70 odd years. But it's been framed like this. So there are some in the military establishment who are thinking now or never. Now we can actually use that opportunity to bring that war to Lebanon. But as you rightly say, there's a lot of breathing space for escalation up in a way that I think Hezbollah could escalate in a way that is nowhere near. Hamas has nowhere near the capabilities that Hezbollah has, and it's the reach of the weaponry. You mentioned 130,000 missiles. Nobody knows how many they do have. I remember when I was the last time in southern Lebanon a couple of years ago, and I think it was 2014, nearly a decade ago. They had around 100,000 missiles. We expect this in the last 10 years to have potentially doubled. So nobody knows how many they have. Certainly a lot of new technology, a lot of more of reach, more the warheads they have are far worse than anything that Hamas has, and they can basically hit any target in Israel as they please. So if they wanted to strike inside Israel, deep inside Israeli territory with a large warhead, Hezbollah could do it. But obviously that would be the sort of escalation Israel is looking for at the moment to kind of create a casus belli. But it's also a slap in the face. Remember, the Americans wanted calmer waters. They withdrawn one of the US strike carrier groups from the region because they had hoped this would be the end of escalation as was feared on the 7th of October. And now Israel is choosing to actually escalate and potentially put more fuel on the fire. And so there is certainly going to be an escalatory response. The question is just when and how. And I still trust that Hezbollah, despite everything, is somewhat a more strategically minded and rationally minded, funny enough, rationally minded actor than Israel is.
Is this a kind of Samson option that Netanyahu is deploying? Bring the house down on top of everyone. It is clear, not to everyone. There are many people who criticize what I'm about to say, but it is clear to me that the Americans don't want a war with Iran. They don't want to have to go to war with Lebanon, which is what strikes on Hezbollah would inevitably become. But Netanyahu seems to want to drag them into it.
Yeah, it's the hardliners. It's not just Netanyahu. Netanyahu is the poster child of this far-right ethno-nationalist movement inside his own government, and he empowered them. He's been, over the last 20 years, or the last 30 years really, has pivoted further and further to the far-right fringes of Israeli society and has dragged the entire country to the far right as well. So I used to live in Israel more than a decade ago, before Netanyahu came to power, and there was still a somewhat middle center sort of political way that has completely disappeared. He's dragged the country to the far right. The populism is now everywhere. And it's that sort of society that is now coming out on TikTok and social media and saying all the things that they're saying about Palestinians, about Arabs, the racism, the xenophobia that we're seeing. These are the people who are sent into Gaza as well. And they kind of create these videos which are dehumanizing Palestinians and Arabs. So Bibi Netanyahu is clearly the problem, but he has now created a movement also within government, within the Knesset as well, who are supporting him. And he himself knows his own personal political survival is very much based on this war to continue. And the fear is for him that if this war ever went into another phase 2, which would be less escalatory, low intensity in Gaza, that this would be enough for those people, at the center of politics in Israel now to kind of launch any new elections, and any new election, any poll you're seeing at the moment means that Bibi would be eventually gone. So he has a clear idea of keeping this going, keeping escalation high, because that means he will have to stay in power for the time being. He's under immense pressure domestically. He's even under immense pressure from his own far-right groups, because for them, the ethnic cleansing that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip is not going far enough. I mean, they would love to see more of that, what they call depopulizing, the depopulation of the Gaza Strip. These far-right nutcases, and many of them are actually convicted terrorists by Israeli law, these kind of people, for them, it doesn't go far enough. So he's under pressure there. He's under pressure by the establishment, which is the intelligence services, the military, who certainly are not united in what they want in Gaza. They're not united in terms of knowing what the day after would be. They're not united when it comes to having a strategy in the north of Israel vis-a-vis Hezbollah. So we shouldn't think of Israel as a unitary actor. Israel is an extremely divided country right now, not only societally, socially, but also in terms of those people who lead the country at the helm. And so that's not really the sort of country that should be going to war and should be deciding the fate of stability and security and prosperity for the entire region.
Doctor, what's the meaning of the troop withdrawals in northern Gaza? Given how much blood was spilled to take these positions, why is Israel now abandoning them?
Yeah, good question. I mean, what we see here is a phase. We're probably seeing the beginning of phase 2 of that operation. The Americans, despite everything, have behind closed doors put a lot of pressure on the Israelis to kind of bring this war to an end. I mean, this war for the Americans, for the Biden administration, is a nuisance as they're going into re-election. So they want to make sure that this doesn't become or doesn't remain this sort of headline, producing headlines in the media, but also in the entire campaigning season that they're going into. So they put pressure on the Americans to kind of find an off-ramp. The Israelis have said, no, we're not interested in an off-ramp right now. Bibi, particularly, not interested to find an off-ramp. But they're also realizing that this war cannot be won. There was a belief in early December, late November, that where the Israelis thought they were very close to finding Sinwar and Dave and other sort of figureheads of Hamas, get rid of them, and then kind of build a victory narrative around it. That's kind of what Israel wants. They want to create a victory narrative. They haven't really won anything. I mean, if you look at the objectives, they haven't freed the hostages. There isn't a military way to get rid of them. They haven't really made a lot of progress when it comes to the tunnels. They haven't found any of the Hamas leaders. They haven't stopped Hamas from actually firing rockets. So if you look at the list of objectives, they haven't really achieved anything. So they're now saying they need a long war. And not only does Bibi want it politically, but even the IDF is now saying we are probably in it for the rest of 2024 and possibly beyond that. So it's a kind of protracted conflict, never ending, which couldn't be maintained at the current level of escalation and can't be maintained at the current level of intensity. So they're withdrawing troops, knowing that there will be a rotation coming in whereby some will have to be sent back into the Gaza Strip later on. But for the most part, it's also freeing up capacity because, as you mentioned earlier on already, the Israeli economy is in a dire position. They need people to return to their desks, to their workplaces, to keep generating money for this war, because this war is also economically not sustainable. So they're trying to create a way, an off-ramp that makes the war more palatable to domestic population, more palatable to the Americans, and more sustainable for an indefinite period of time. And we always know when wars go into that sort of phase, as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan from our Western point of view, this is usually when we begin to fail these wars. This is when you go into a phase where you basically realize you're not winning a war, but you keep on going anyway.
Finally, Doctor, and I'm grateful for your time, the atrocity today in Kerman appears to have killed hundreds of people and maimed many hundreds more. Very serious security lapse on the part of the Iranians, to be sure. But it is murder most foul. It is mass murder most foul, and can only have been carried out by one or other of the organizations fighting terrorist organizations that are in the pay of and under the protection of Western countries. One immediately thinks of the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, based in France, based in Albania, under NATO protection. I've seen them with my own eyes. The consequences of this mass murder may be even more serious than the murders of the general in Damascus and the Hamas leader in Beirut.
Well, we have to be very careful at this point to point any fingers. I agree with you. You know, the MEK is a terrible organization, certainly not the sort of actor that anybody should have any engagement with. But I would say, looking at where we stand at the moment, look at the evidence that we see. First of all, mass atrocities with civilian casualties. While the Israelis kill a lot of civilians in Gaza and Palestinians, they usually refrain from killing Iranian civilians. They usually target them, as we've seen in quite interestingly in Beirut yesterday. I mean, they were able to kill who they wanted to kill without any collateral damage. It seems like the Israelis are able to do it if they really want to. And usually when they're in Iran, they're able to do it. When they use their proxies in Iran, they're able to do it. And also considering where it happened, how it happened, it it looks like it's ISIS, Khorasan, more than anything else. I think it's one of these sort of terrorist organizations more than anything else. But it will be severe. And the Iranians, again, they will have to do an investigation and see what comes out of it and then respond adequately. And they usually respond adequately with delay. I just don't think there's any evidence that any of the Western or Israeli proxy groups were involved in that attack, at least as far as we know it at the moment.
Dr. Krieg, thank you for your wisdom. Very good to meet you finally in person. Dr. Andreas Krieg, author, professor at King's College. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Were Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell Israeli spies? Duh. 18,921 of you have voted, and the verdict is, well, shall we say, fairly overwhelming. Let me take a quick break, and I'll be right back with more great guests, great calls. This is the Mother of All Talk Shows. On the line is a Rose in Texas. How's that at the beginning of a song? On Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
Fan of the show, transgender fan of the show. And I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children at nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Okay, get voting. Were Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell Israeli spies? Don't tempt me into a lengthy discourse on that subject, of which I assure you I am fully capable. You can vote on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my Twitter, on my X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the show, ring the bell so that you know when I'm broadcasting in future. Telephone numbers again, US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. In the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number, 0044 203 966 2625. Now, there are so many wars raging at the minute. I didn't have time to mention the war in the Red Sea, but I will be tomorrow online at the No to NATO, No to War event with two of the very best speakers around. Professor Said Mohammed Marandi from the University of Tehran. How timeous that he should be on our platform. And His Excellency, the Honourable Peter Ford, former British ambassador and deputy leader of my party, the Workers' Party, which founded up the No to NATO, No to War organization. So it's at 9 p.m. UK, 4 p.m. in New York, and 10 p.m. in Central Europe. That's 9 p.m. UK time. Tomorrow night on all platforms, No to NATO, No to War, up the Red Sea without a paddle. I promise you, it's going to be worth seeing. Some messages coming in. Bob Cosmic says some ships are now sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, just as Israel, Britain, France, and America wanted. This is the green light to create the Ben Gurion Canal and to get that money that Egypt gets. Well, you know my views, Bob, already on that. Chip Walter says, can you imagine being convicted of terrorism under Israeli law? To clear that hurdle must mean you are some kind of John Wayne Gacy type person. Jeff is on the line from the great state of Michigan in the USA about Hamas. Let's hear what he has to say. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. George, did I hear that you were a boxer at one time?
I was, yeah, but I got out just before they ruined my looks.
Well, all I can do is encourage you to continue to exercise, because that will give us all the pleasure of having you around the longest time. I want to say first that Hamas is the symptom, not the cause. And number two, for all those people who are applauding the U.S. takedown of Houthi missiles and drones and so forth, just recognize the Genocide Convention that was signed on to after 48 to stop all Holocausts in the future. That the only two groups in this world right now are taking action to stop that genocide. Those two groups are the Houthis and Hezbollah. They should be praised. This is disgusting. And
Jeff, what a wise call. Yeah, what a wise call. I'm grateful to you for making it and for your kind words. There are more than two. South Africa, for example, must be commended in the highest terms for having the balls to take a genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. If Israel is convicted before that court of genocide, this will be a truly historic and momentous event. And it will be very difficult for the United States, even this administration, to veto the concomitant cease and desist order that would come from the court. The court can order Israel to cease and desist. Now, Israel, of course, can refuse to implement the court's judgment, but at very substantial cost to anyone in any other government in the world that supported them. It could turn the tables, very importantly, and in any case is an historic act. I saw that the minor public school boy, what's his name, Elon Levy. I apparently offended some when I refused to debate with him in Oxford University. But the reason I walked out was I was tricked. If someone had invited me to come and have a student union debate with a supporter of apartheid who was Israeli, I would of course refuse the invitation. But they put up little Elon, who was a dual citizen then and now. He's now Netanyahu's worldwide spokesman. Can you believe it? Mark Regev was sat behind me in 2005 at the US Senate. Little Levy, on whom I walked out in Oxford University, is now Netanyahu's global spokesman. It's almost as if they're following me around. But anyway, Levy launched this vicious attack on South Africa and had the gall to say that South Africa will be judged. Yes, it will be judged all right, Master Levy. It'll be judged historically as the victor in a great revolutionary war to overthrow one apartheid, being determined to bring about an end to another apartheid, that being the apartheid that you are now the paid apologist for. But there's deep history between Israel and apartheid South Africa. One of the reasons, one of the methods by which both apartheid Israel and apartheid South Africa were in one case successful and in the other case almost there in the development of illegally acquired and undeclared nuclear weapons is because of the deep and close relationship between Israel and apartheid South Africa. And if you think about it for one moment, you can see why. They are both ethno-supremacist regimes, or were. The chosen people came from Europe and seized the land of the Palestinians and ruthlessly exterminated, annihilated, extirpated the local inhabitants, exactly like the apartheid state of South Africa, though it preferred to put them in yoke and chain and work them as the price of them staying on their land. And that's why Mandela said very, very clearly and eloquently that actually the apartheid in Israel-Palestine is worse, much worse, than the apartheid against which the heroes of the African National Congress under the leadership of Nelson Mandela fought and prevailed. But there's another side of this that many of you have already heard me describe in my speech in the Oxford Union on a different occasion. some of the greatest heroes in the struggle to defeat South African apartheid were Jews. I mean, real leaders. I'm not talking about Guardian liberals. I'm talking about Jews like Joe Slovo, the military leader of Mkonte and Sizwe, the armed wing of the African National Congress. I'm talking about his wife, Ruth First, martyred at the hands of apartheid South Africa. I'm talking about Albie Sachs. I'm talking about Ronnie Casserols. I'm talking about Dennis Goldberg. I'm talking about Max and Audrey Coleman. I'm talking about legions and legions of fighters of the anti-apartheid struggle, the African National Congress and its armed wing, who were Jews. Jews don't have to choose apartheid, Mr. Levy. In fact, the very best and greatest of Jews in South Africa were in the front line to overthrow the apartheid state that your new country, for which you're now the global spokesman, was deeply complicit in. Nino says, we want to hear your take on Epstein and Maxwell. Come on, George Galloway. Well, we may wait until we've got the list, but we'll see. Maybe take it up with Chris Hedges, our great guest, coming up shortly. Eve is on the line from Florida on the events today in Iran. Eve, welcome.
To have me on your show. I wanted to say that it is the anniversary of the assassination of Soleimani, but it is the fourth anniversary, which is very important because in the periodic calendar of the United States, it's exactly the same timing. It's before a presidential election, which is going to be very difficult for Joe Biden. So after Afghanistan, after the debacle there, after the debacle in Ukraine, this administration is very tempted to attack Iran. And of course, Israel also wants to attack Iran. But there is one problem. And the problem for the American, not for the Israeli, is that because of the new position of Saudi Arabia and also because of Egypt, America wants Iran to attack first. Because if Iran is attacked, if America attacks Iran just like that, it will make the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran stronger, and all the other one too. So this is the only thing which is preventing the war. But I think the war against Iran is 99% at this day, and that's what I wanted to say, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Eve, in Florida. We're staying in Florida. Who wouldn't? Where our regular professor, the legend Simon in Florida, is up now. Simon, thanks very much for coming back on the show. We look forward every week to the sagacity of your roundups. What have you got for us this evening?
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. Well, we're starting off the new year with a quite astounding level of international developments. And indeed, today we've now had the statement from the United States with 12 other nations issued by the White House, essentially giving an ultimatum to the Houthis concerning their actions in the Red Sea. And it's worth, I think, comparing the final sentence of this ultimatum with what we've heard today from the brilliant foreign minister of India, the president of Iran, and the leader of Hezbollah in Lebanon, all within hours of each other. The final sentence of the American statement from the White House says, quote, "We remain committed to the international rules-based order and are determined to hold malign actors accountable for unlawful seizures and attacks." Now, not in response to that, but just hours beforehand, given the time difference, whilst giving an astonishingly brilliant speech introducing his new book called Why Bharat, the New Aim for India, Matters, Dr. Jai Shankar, who's been their foreign minister for a decade, as part of his comments said, "The rules-based system is the product of a bygone era. And in the future, we are going to see further globalization, rebalancing," which was the term he used previously in Russia meeting with Mr. Lavrov, and also greater moves towards multipolarity. So flying completely at odds with the statement from the Americans and their NATO allies and partners. The president of Iran, Mr. Raisi, reacting in part to the terrible attack on the memorial procession close to the funeral location, the grave location of General Soleimani in Kerman, said that the old world order is ending, and we, meaning Iran, are building a just new world order. And the leader of Hezbollah, Mr. Nasrallah, said the one thing the world has learned from Gaza is that international law will not protect civilian populations. And I think those comments and the juxtaposition between the global South and NATO is in some ways a continuation of where we left off, sadly, the end of last year. But it should be noted that in just the last couple of days, President Putin's also made two speeches, one in relation to the Commonwealth of Independent States and how it will become integrated in what I've been repeatedly mentioning, the Greater Eurasian Partnership, and the second celebrating Russia's new leadership of BRICS and explaining how their first priority for 2024 is to see increased alignment within that group of both foreign policy and security. So we can still see the shifts that started to manifest themselves in what President Xi called the greatest changes seen in a century, continuing to develop right from the offset of the new year. And we're only 3 days into it.
We are. I'm kind of anxious about, I'm looking for this new world order to hove into view. I'm still seeing on every screen the unipolar NATO massacres in the war in the Red Sea, war against Iran, war against Syria, war against Lebanon, war against the Palestinians, the navies of the old world steaming not up the Yangtze, but definitely in the Straits of Taiwan. When, Professor, are we going to start seeing action on this new world order rather than words, if you'll forgive me saying so?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I did actually see an informed commentator on Press TV today point out that whilst it's frustrating, and particularly in relation to the apparent lack of response from the Iranians and the Lebanese to clear provocations, it is precisely because They don't want their hand to be forced, as many might suggest occurred to President Putin in relation to Ukraine. And they are trying to make sure that they pursue their long-term agenda without doing something that would justify direct military intervention by the United States. And the UK-based members of your audience should pay close attention to what the British government is currently involved in. Not only do they have this unpublished defence cooperation agreement dating from December 2020 between the UK and Israel, but they also have the bilateral 2030 roadmap that was signed in March of 2023. And in particular, I would draw people's attention to Section 2B, Part 2, and also Section 3D, both of which specifically deal with joint action against Iran. So it's noteworthy that none of the littoral states on the Red Sea, by that I mean the coastline nations, have taken any part in either the coalition of the willing or indeed this joint statement. And that was a matter brought up by the permanent representative of Algeria in his maiden speech to the United Nations Security Council today. So we're going to have to see whether or not Algeria is a worthy replacement for the excellent work done by the lady representative for the United Arab Emirates. But there's still a great number of things in play, and I don't think it's reasonable, frankly, to expect all of them to manifest themselves instantly, even though you or I...
Just one would do. Professor Simon, yes. Professor Simon, thank you for that weekly global update. The man is a mine of information. Coming up after a very short break is the man who should be in the White House, or at least at Foggy Bottom, Chris Hedges, the former head of the Middle East Bureau of the New York Times, but now writer and host of the Chris Hedges Report. Stay tuned. He's must.
The 1897 edition of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Read by George Galloway. Available only on Patreon.
The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with an end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it, men in it, half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash on Mars. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, you get me narrating War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I'm no Orson Welles, but I'm the next best thing. And you get my films, The Killings of Tony Blair, Killing Kelly. You get them absolutely free when you support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. I really need your help on that. If you are at all able to send me on Patreon the price of 1 cup of tea per week, that would be really helpful and would support my work no end. Were Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell Israeli spies? That's the big question in today's poll. Now, you can send us an email, by the way, onair@moats.tv. The one and only Chris Hedges, political commentator extraordinaire, joins us again on the mother of all talk shows. Chris, what about an answer to the question on my poll? Was Epstein and Maxwell, maybe to a slightly lesser extent, or maybe not, knowing her father as well as I did, were Epstein and Maxwell Israeli spies in your view?
I think there's a lot of indication that there was, first of all, we know that his houses were wired for surveillance. We know that there were numerous videotapes of powerful people allegedly having sexual relations with a harem that Maxwell and Epstein held at their on their island and in their houses. And we know that all of those tapes disappeared. Presumably, they're in the hands of the FBI. And I think it's also interesting that none of the people, certainly in positions of any real authority, have been charged. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I haven't seen any hard evidence. But yeah, I think that those questions are valid.
Bill Clinton, would he be one of those who did not have sexual relations on that island? His name seems to be the biggest name so far.
Well, that would be hard to believe given the proclivities of Bill Clinton. Dershowitz is another. And there's a long list, and not only, of course, Prince Andrew and Mitchell. And these are all very, the former prime minister of Israel. So this is a powerful cabal of the global elite who have the facility to essentially, if it's true, block any information. And I think the big question comes down to where are those tapes? We know they exist. Where are they? Nobody's provided an answer to that. The assumption is that they're with the FBI, but we don't know.
Now, you mentioned Mr. Dershowitz. He has been, it's said, tapped by Mr. Netanyahu to represent Israel in what will be very quickly upon us. I think the 12th of January is the first public hearing of South Africa's reference to the ICJ on genocide charges. Would you have picked Mr. Dershowitz as your brief in those circumstances?
Well, no, but, Israel doesn't have many friends at this point. Dershowitz has long been, I actually debated him on Israel, Palestine at Columbia University. He lies like he breathes, and so do, frankly, does the Israeli military and the Israeli government. So they're kind of in sync. I found it fascinating that Netanyahu would even want to defend himself at the ICJ because I don't think Israel recognizes the validity of the court.
Yes, I suppose he had to make a quick judgment. This is all moving very fast. South Africa have done the world service by having the gumption to bring what seems on the face of it a very strong case that all of the actions and the words, almost in synchronicity, of Israeli leaders, the Israeli ambassador to London was at it on LBC this very day. They are talking genocide and doing genocide, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. They've been surprisingly candid. One would think they would be candid in Hebrew and not so candid in English, but they've been quite candid in English, turning it into a parking lot, making it uninhabitable. They've been quite open about what they're doing. And then we have to talk about the scale of the assault. So I was in Sarajevo during the war, 300 to 400 shells a day, 24 wounded a day, 4 to 5 dead a day. And I don't want to minimize what happened in Sarajevo. 30 years later, I still have nightmares about it. But in Gaza, we're talking about a child dying every 10 minutes. We're talking about hundreds of people dying a day. And then, of course, hundreds more being wounded, thousands missing. So you juxtapose the siege of Sarajevo with what's happening in Gaza. And we have not seen this obliteration, this kind of carpet bombing of a densely packed urban area. I don't know. You'd probably have to go back to Stalingrad or something where 90% of the edifices and buildings were destroyed.
I think you're right. I think Stalingrad is the comparator. And of course, the difference is that the civilian population had left Stalingrad when it became the epicenter of the greatest battle ever fought in human history. Here, all these civilians are literally trapped in the middle of the battle. It is, when you think about it, as you and I know Gaza well, when you think about it, it is incredible, literally incredible, in that it's impossible to believe that this has all been allowed to continue for as long as it has.
Yeah, I mean, I covered war, and I covered for 20 years overseas. I'm used to the cynicism of the United States and the global elite, but even I am taken aback at the level of slaughter and the level of destruction. I mean, 500,000, according to the UN, 500,000 Palestinians in Gaza are now starving. The sanitation, we're on the cusp of major epidemics of infectious diseases. I mean, this kind of siege where you destroy the entire infrastructure, including, of course, hospitals, where you orchestrate a famine, it's almost medieval. And yet, not only is, let's talk about Europe, the industrial world, not responding, but in fact, they're aiding, and in the case of the United States, aiding and abetting a clear case of genocide. It is quite staggering. And you know, it's worse than they have nowhere to go. They're told to go to the south. They're told that this area will be safe, and then they're bombed. I mean, the kind of the cruelty of trying to seek a safe haven, and then like Khan Yunis, remember, Rafah, these were places that were the people in the northern part of Gaza were told to go as a safe area. And now these areas are being obliterated by Israeli bombs. You know, 1,000 pound iron fragmentation bombs. It's really jaw dropping. And it's, of course, aside from what it's done to the Palestinians, as I covered the Middle East for 7 years, it's really deeply counterproductive in the long term for Israel.
Well, we'll see about that. They obviously have decided to go for broke, hence the absolutely illegal terrorist murder of a Hamas official in another country, in the capital of another country, in Beirut. But as long as they get away with these things, Chris, why would they stop doing them?
Well, they can get away with them, and the only restraint that could be imposed on them would come from the United States, and it won't come from either of the two ruling parties because their munitions, in particular tank munitions, are all produced in the United States. But you see that next generation, the polls, particularly among the young, but really certainly within the Democratic Party, it's a majority of people do not support what's happening in Gaza, what Israel is doing in Gaza. And so the long-term consequences are not good for Israel. We're already watching the United States walk away from Ukraine, but eventually the same thing will happen with Israel. And if the United States ever pulls the plug on Israel, it's going to be a very difficult for Israel to sustain itself, as it already is a pariah nation. Only 10 countries voted against the ceasefire in that non-binding resolution, 2 of them being, of course, the U.S. and Israel. So it's a very isolated state. Cellular colonial projects can work, such as in the United States, when you exterminate, as the United States did, 90% of the indigenous population. that Israel can't kill on that level. 5.5 million Palestinians under occupation and another 9 million in the diaspora. And I just came back from Egypt and Doha. I was doing broadcasting for Al Jazeera. The stock of Hamas is in the stratosphere. So the siege or the attack, the genocidal attack by Israel has catapulted Hamas's stock, not just throughout the Muslim world, but throughout the global South, because this sends a message. Rules don't apply to us. They apply to you, but they don't apply to us. Following 20 years of the American debacles in the Middle East, the credibility of the United States is pretty much nil. I mean, it's almost as isolated now as Israel. It's of course because of its embrace of this killing and the empowerment of the Israeli military to continue this killing.
Now, I know you're a peace-loving man, you're a Christian man, you probably are an opponent of nuclear weapons. But I've got to tell you, if I was the leader of Iran, I would be rapidly enriching sufficient uranium to make myself a nuclear weapon, because if Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons and is more or less openly evincing a wish to destroy my country, well, I'd make sure I had at least one of the same weapons that they have. That would be logical, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, it's the North Korea rule. So you can invade and destroy Iraq because not only did it not have weapons of mass destruction, it doesn't have or didn't have, under Saddam Hussein, nuclear weapons. So North Korea did, which is why it's still here. And that lesson wasn't lost on the rest of the world. So yes, I think and remember, Israel's nuclear program was done in secret. It was in violation of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. And again, the United States was certainly complicit in making Israel a nuclear power. So it's a response, and an understandable response, yes.
Now, what about the impact of all of this at home, Chris? The sense is a kind of hiatus around the choice of the Republican candidate, a doubt as to whether the leading candidate in all the polls, Donald Trump, will be able to take the field, to be on the ballots. We've got people trying to strike candidates off the ballots in true Banana Republic style. We've got the opinion polls you referred to over the Gaza issue. What's your sense of where we're going in this now? We're now into a presidential election year.
Well, clearly the strategy of the Democratic Party is to try and put Donald Trump in jail. I don't know if it's going to work. They don't have anything to offer, really, the Democratic Party. Biden's approval rating, and especially with his fervent support of Israeli genocide, has sunk to pitiful levels. So the Democratic Party really offers nothing, but it's an attempt to remove Trump from the ballot and essentially put him on trial and perhaps even attempt to put him in prison. That's what they're trying to do. I don't know if it's going to work. But it is, I think, as you point out, an indication of how anemic and how broken the American political system is, that we've descended to those kinds of tactics. Trump is, of course, sounding more and more like a kind of that right-wing demagogue of immigrants poisoning our society, etc. So it looks on both sides very, very vicious. I think there's a high likelihood that Trump, I don't think there's any doubt that he'll get the Republican nomination, but I think there's a high likelihood that he could win the election.
Well, that would certainly put us on the helter-skelter. Whatever happened to, and I kind of owe you an apology, Chris, I was ready to suspend my detestation of Robert Kennedy's extraordinary fidelity to the Zionist cause because of what Kennedy was offering more broadly, more widely on all the other fronts. But of course, as the post-October 7, Kennedy has become more Netanyahu than Netanyahu. Is it profiting him in the polls, in your view?
No. I know from people who work on his campaign that especially younger supporters have deserted him in droves. It has profited him in terms of centers of power, in terms of funding, but not in terms of support. And the stuff that comes out of his mouth is just ludicrous. You know, Hamas in their charter says they have to kill Jews all over the world. As far as I know, Hamas has never carried out an attack against Jews outside of historic Palestine, occupied territories, or Israel. I mean, so it's just fantasy. It's the talking points of the most right-wing, the most retrograde elements within Israel. It's not factually based. I can't forgive him for that. I never could. But yes, he's become, he's, and on that issue, I mean, there's no other way to describe him but as an extremist.
Yeah, I mean, he sounds like one of these settler leaders, and he's running around with people in the U.S. who are representatives of these settler extremists. It's a sad end, though, to the Kennedy political dynasty, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, it was always a mixed dynasty. Remember that both JFK and Robert Kennedy had this fixation of trying to assassinate Castro. They were very hostile to the civil rights movement, which doesn't cancel out the positives. I think there's strong evidence that JFK was willing to confront the military-industrial complex. He didn't trust them, especially after the Bay of Pigs. But yes, it is a sad end. But that dynasty kind of petered out and died after the assassination of Robert Kennedy.
I think so, unfortunately. Chris Hedges, as always, a pleasure, an honor to interview you on the mother of all talk shows. Thanks for joining us. Were Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell Israeli spies? Well, you've only got about another 15 minutes left to vote. Have your say on Telegram, on Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. A quick break, and then it's Veronica in France, followed by Myra in London. Stay tuned.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
J.P. Morgan paid him off for the Iraq War. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
I'm very proud of that film, The Killings of Tony Blair, and you can get it free if you support me on patreon.com/George Galloway. Please do. Let's go straight to the phone lines where Veronica is in France. Veronica, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
I want to say hello, sweetheart. Can you hear me?
Thank you, most kind. Yes,
All
you're
right.
on the air.
I've followed you for years. Followed you for years, mate.
Thank you. Thank you. Turn your volume down so that we're not getting feedback, Veronica.
Okay, right. I just wanted to say hi, and I wanted to say, oh, Jesus. All righty. You know, there's been Syed Razi Mosami, who's been murdered, and he has been murdered by the Israelis. Can you hear me? Okay. He was
But you need to
murdered
turn
by the
your.
Israelis,
Stop a minute, Veronica. You need to turn off or turn down the volume completely on your set that you're watching the show on. Otherwise, you're speaking in duplicate. Okay? Yes, what a pity, because Veronica seemed like a real fan. Myra is in London. Let's hear from her. Myra, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for having me on. I actually rang up because of Gonzalo Lira. I wrote to the American embassy because I couldn't email them, and they wrote back, and they were quite concerned, and they wanted his date of birth and one thing and another. And I didn't know how to get those, so I rang you up instead. But while I'm here, I'd like to mention to everybody that the terrible, terrible things are going on, of course, but there's a man in prison in Belmarsh who is a completely innocent man, and on the 20th and the 21st of February, his appeal is going to be heard at the Royal Courts of Justice. And we need to have masses and masses of people there to support him. And through you, I would really, really appreciate them all coming along from 8:30 in the morning and being there to support Julian Assange.
Very well said. Very, very, very well said, Myra. It would be one of the greatest of all crimes, and my goodness, we have committed many great crimes. It would be one of the greatest crimes ever committed by the British state if the world's greatest journalist, if the whistleblower and truth teller and publisher, husband and father, Julian Assange, were to be deported on a one-sided extradition treaty to the injustice system of the United States of America, where he has committed no crime, is not an American citizen, has not even been accused of committing a crime on US territory. Anything that Julian Assange did, he did here. It's plainly not a crime in Britain, what he did here. And therefore, to deport him on the 20th, 21st of February would be not just a great crime against him, it would be a great crime against us. It would murder journalism, freedom of speech, the right to know what your rulers and their friends are doing in your name on your dime. It would be a grotesque travesty if Benjamin Netanyahu avoided justice, but Julian Assange disappeared into what will effectively be a hole for the rest of his life. So if you can possibly be in the Strand at the High Court on the 20th at 8:30 in the morning, please, please be there. Dell is in South Carolina. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Dell.
Hey, George, how you doing tonight?
All good, thank you very much.
You're full of knowledge and insight, and you have wonderful guests, and it's a privilege talking to you. But, you know, being an American up here, I'm so disappointed in our government, the way they're doing things, funding this war, killing and slaughtering all these women, children, and the elderly folks who cannot take care of themselves. I was watching today as Africa is going to file in a world court to put just file against Biden, Lloyd Austin. These guys need to be prosecuted. Blinken, like I say, and all these guys are just disappointing to us in America. Here we are, where our government's going to be going down $10 million here in the next 3 weeks. We're not going to be able to fund our own government, but yet we can fund all these wars. You know, I watched Jerusalem and you guys, and we ought to be a country of peace. We should be helping people, not funding wars. We have turned into a country of nothing but war. Like I say, because these guys, Lloyd Austin, they make money off these wars, off of Reagan, Boeing, because they fund all this stuff to make and produce. Here's Lindsey Graham want to bomb everybody. Haley, who's running for president, she's not the one to be in the House. We don't have anyone. Like I say, we ought to get with Douglas McGregor, our country, our choice. And the person I see running right now I would vote for would be Michael Reckenlaw, who's a professor out of Hillsdale College. He's independent. No one owns him. He's got his own thought, and he's all for good. So, you know, I'm looking at this gentleman here to be an independent. But, you know, it's really tough for me as an American here. They're using my tax dollars to slaughter people, and I do not appreciate that. I don't think any American here appreciates anything they're doing right now, George. But I tell you what, I do appreciate you and George, the judge, and all these guys who are telling the truth, like Scott Ritter and Tony, and all these guys that the judge have on here. They are so knowledgeable, all these retired guys who are professional colonels. But go ahead and take it, George. What's your thought on this?
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful call, Dell in South Carolina, the voice of, the true voice of the working man, the working peg in American society. How galling must it be, Dell, that all of the things that the ordinary Americans don't have, not only Israel have, thanks to American taxpayer dollars, but even Ukraine has. Ukraine has a level of welfare, of free health, of free university education that Americans can only dream about, and they're doing it all on American taxpayer dollars. You really couldn't make it up. Del, thanks for the call. Some YouTube comments. The Imperialist. Maxwell's father, Robert, was given a state funeral in Israel with all honors. That says it all. It does. Indeed, Mustafa bin Saleh says Israel has been blackmailing Americans for years. Senators, Congress members, pastors, he adds darkly. Now, coming up, I've got my good wife, Gayatri, Galloway, who will be reviewing the social media. But let's take a couple of calls first. Wael is in Bristol on the hunger strike at the hospital in Bath over Palestine. I'm all ears. Wael, who's on hunger strike?
It is me. I've been in my hunger strike from the 22nd of October after I lost most of my family. Basically, everyone gone. Everyone died. And I've been in hospital on the bed from the 29th of October after I've been 7 days in my home. And I wasn't very well. They transferred me to hospital. I survived on a letter B fluid, not too much, but a letter B fluid, paracetamol. All I don't want the government to vote for ceasefire. Stop killing innocent children. We're not tourists. We're not enemy. Why support enemy and everyone talking about Israelis have the right to?
Well, look, Wael, stop for a moment. I don't. I myself, I hope the audience can, but I can't make out a word that you're saying. That may be because you're enfeebled through a hunger strike. It may be because of the way you're holding the device. But it's my duty to ask you to cease this hunger strike. Starving yourself together to death will not help the Palestinian cause. It's my duty, I think my legal duty, but definitely my ethical duty to encourage you to find other ways of making the entirely legitimate protest points that you are making. YouTube comments, red alert. Soon after Iran sent a warship to help Yemen, we hear of tragic events in Iran, not a coincidence. Saeed Sajid says the last gasps of the Khazars in Ukraine and Palestine. The banks are not happy. And Calamity 2007 says 3 days into 2024 and already fears of World War III, and entirely legitimate fears at that. Well, not every man that has to see his wife on TV, but that's my lot for the moment in life. So she's going to give us the review of social media, because many hundreds, maybe thousands of messages come into the show, and we're simply not able for me to read them all out. But she studies them carefully and summarizes them brilliantly. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Let me start with this one from Patreon.
My wife is frozen, metaphorically.
I attended your lecture at the University ever since.
Not literally. Yeah, go ahead. We're having technical difficulties reaching her. I do hope that we'll get back to her, or else I'll be in trouble. Were Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell Israeli spies? Well, here's the result. Almost 21,000 people voted. On Telegram, 92% said yes, they were. On Twitter, 88% on Twitter said they were. On the YouTube community poll, 85% of those who voted, 12,000 or more, said they were Israeli spies. And on the YouTube stream, a staggering 91%. Now, Dave in Massachusetts wants to talk about Palestine. Go ahead, Dave.
George, first-time caller, long-time listener. Can you hear me all right?
All clear. The whole world's listening. Go ahead, Dave.
Awesome sauce. Speaking of sauce, I got dinner cooking here in Massachusetts. So I'm from Lowell, Massachusetts. And I was talking to somebody today from one of the Industrial Revolution birthplaces here in the States. And he was so afraid to talk about Palestine because I am, in my group, the only one who stood up for Palestine on Facebook, lost his job as an educator because some snitch went to administration and said that he's posting anti-Semitic stuff, and they told me that this was non-negotiable. The union couldn't defend me because I was just a brand new hire in the district. So it took me 2 months before I finally found work again. But that's how bad things are here in the States. People are going broke. I'm catching up on my rent. I'm going into debt like most Americans. And in America, what do we have? Sports, gridiron, things, the bread and circuses, the distractions. But I think it's starting to catch up with people here. I think people are slowly starting to get it, even in shit-lib Massachusetts.
Well, that's an extraordinary, revelatory, powerful call, Dave, and is a very helpful reminder to people of the price of standing up for justice. In the words of Martin Luther, "Here I stand, I can do no other," and that you are paying and have paid that price is, of course, a scandal, a disgrace, but it's also a great mark of honor for you. that your children and their children should be proud of. Thank you for the stand that you have made. She's put 50 pence in the meter. My good wife Gayatri should be there now on the screen. What's rattling, Gayatri? Let's start from the beginning.
Thanks so much for everything you're doing. I attended your lecture at the University of Victoria about 20 years ago and have been with you ever since. I'm not proud of having graduated with a degree from that institution. However, I'm very delighted to now be a MOATS graduate. Long live the dear people of Palestine. Love from Ingmar. How incredible is that?
How beautiful. Victoria is on the west coast of Canada, off Vancouver, as I recall. I not only spoke there, but I stayed there. It was like the 1950s Britain that I only vaguely remember. Its architecture, its topography was a real British colony. But the people there were marvelous and turned out in huge numbers to hear me speak there. I've spoken in Vancouver many times, so a big thanks to the correspondent and a big up to all my friends on
he's the patron.
Canada's west coast.
Wonderful. Yes, so
Excellent.
Ingmar is a
How
patron.
wonderful.
Now, Mega John.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Mega John makes the point, 57 Muslim countries and only South Africa has the guts to file the ICJ suit, which actually in a way it's fitting, isn't it? South Africa themselves having experienced apartheid firsthand the way they did, and they're the one who are filing this suit, don't you think?
Well, let's be positive about it. It's better that South Africa is tabling this legal action than it would be if it were coming from an Arab country or a Muslim country. It is opening to people's minds and will not be able to be hidden that the country that liberated itself from apartheid is supporting the people now being murdered by another apartheid system. That is an extraordinary juxtaposition that catches the attention. I would prefer to say, long live the ANC, long live South Africa for the courage and the skill with which they have put together this indictment. I've read it and I'm filled with admiration for the work that has been done and for the legal team, many of them Jewish, by the way, that South Africa is sending to the International Court of Justice in pursuit of this case. God strengthen them.
Amandla.
Away to. What else have you got for us, Gayatri? We've still got time.
Yes, so just very quickly then, because I had to read this one from Susie. She says, hello, George. Your attire for this evening is spot on. Your charming and boyish looks have been further advanced by your choice of colors. Perfect. So that's from Susie.
That's very nice. That's very nice.
Yes, it's very nice.
Well, I always say my wife turns me out well, but she's not actually turning me out because you're there and I'm here. Anyway, go on.
There you go. So, George, if the leaders of Hamas if some of the leaders of Hamas was killed by a precision-guided missile by Israel, then why couldn't they use these guided missiles against Hamas instead of using 200-pound bombs on women and children? So this Netanyahu must stand trial on war.
There's no answer to that, is there? I mean, if you can pinpoint an apartment in Beirut and kill a Hamas leader, why have you killed 30,000 innocent Palestinians in pursuit of what appears to be zero military victories in the attack that you're making? How can that possibly be justified? How can Israel defend itself at the ICJ? Every day their leading spokesmen are enunciating clearly genocidal thoughts and plans. whilst their armed forces are carrying out genocidal attacks. I don't know why Netanyahu's even turning up at this case.
No, indeed, completely delusional. So yeah. Well, I better go. You've got lots of calls waiting for you.
I do. Thanks and good night. Kiss the children for me, please. The legend that is Erobos in New York is on the line. Erobos, welcome to the show. It's been a few weeks since we heard you, and we always miss you. So welcome back.
Thank you for the kind words. A resplendent, powerful, and empowering new year to you, your wonderful wife who was just on, Gayatri, the social media rattler. And the previous comment is correct. It appears that after her long influence, whether through osmosis or deliberate technique, her sense of style has rubbed off on you in a positive way. So, sort of mentioned that.
Most kind.
I wanted to carve this time out, because for reasons that are frustrating and complicated, and I've hinted on it before, I have been effectively non-personed by the government of the United States of America. And because of that, I'm financially compromised in many ways. However, I wanted to, the world will still be on fire afterwards, but I wanted to express gratitude and a deep, profound respect and privilege to be able to call in on this show. And, I don't have money. If I did, per se, I would support you through Patreon, and I encourage those who can.
Of course.
But I can't, my daily drivers include the guys from the Duran, but I can't call them. But I can't call Brian Bledick. I can't call any of the people that I take analysis from. I can't even send them a note without sending them money, and that's not a slight on them. That's just the way their thing is set up. However, to have the ability to call the mother of all talk shows, and I first called when you were on WBAI and sort of engaged you in the 9/11 situation. And after all this time, to be able, it moves me personally to be able to call, and I don't have to have money. Right? I could just be a person out there. In reality, I could just be a person in the world, a man trying to determine his own way while I still can, while life is with me. And, I just wanted to take this time to carve out this time and say that I really and truly appreciate, no matter what happens going forward, the mother of all talk shows. And I wanted to, you weren't taking calls for reasons that were justified. Your family were on the Happy New Year sort of celebrations. But I really wasn't important to me. And the warm, wonderful lady, I don't know her name after all this time, but she's like a ray of sunshine through the dark, penetrating clouds that are hanging in New York. She's always warm, always nice to me, always returns my calls when she can. A special shout out to her. Your staff is wonderful. You're wonderful. And, I just wanted to say thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, we're all touched and moved by that, especially delivered in the wonderful tonal quality that you have. You're the Barry White of our global university of the airwaves. It is a real pleasure always to hear you. Thank you for your kindness. Vince Majestic, commenting on the earlier call from Myra, says, I actually rang the Chilean embassy too about Gonzalo Lira, and they started grilling me about who I was, demanding my email, phone, etc. Sheesh. Well, of course, the situation with Gonzalo has not yet been resolved. There is an ongoing concern about his health. I saw a message from his father earlier this evening in which he indicates that it has been 12 days since he had a report about Gonzalo's health, which is in danger. He has bronchial problems. He's 56 years old. He's a lifelong chain smoker. You can understand the tremendous fear that his family are living under, that he's going to die in Zelensky's dungeon without the Chileans or the Americans apparently being able, or in the American case, even willing to do anything to help him. There's another legend on the line. It's the one and only Tommy in Glasgow on Palestine. Go on yourself, Tom. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. Salam alaikum, brother. How are you doing today?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah barakatuh. I'm good, thank you very much. What would you like to say?
If I just digress a small second to second my brother Robos there, what a beautiful call, and second every point they made. What a beautiful show you built. What a wonderful university of a life that people can join, participate in a egalitarian way, where, you know, to get views across it is null and void anywhere else. So, and to the person on Hungary,
I'm proud of it.
Yeah. You deserve it. You should be proud of it. And going forward, I've been educating myself in Middle Eastern history and looking at the first university that was built. And I've got stuff on that, and in future weeks I'll come on and maybe do many small parts on that, in dedication to you and your beautiful wife, because forgive me for saying, I'm not patronising or condescending in any way, but I've known you prior to you met your lovely wife, and she's made you from a good man, a great man, even to an even better great person, because your points of view, like the other night you were talking about, you know, don't vote, you will encourage them. For a person who's a politician, for the views that you've espoused for all the years and the stances you take, but this university you built with your great wife there, then alhamdulillah, and I say that in a beautiful way, alhamdulillah, all praise to God. I mean, when the Palestinians are being brutalised in the most terrible way, when their house gets blown up, alhamdulillah. When they lose their mum, alhamdulillah. That means all praise to God. Lose their dad, their brother or sister, alhamdulillah. So alhamdulillah for giving something beautiful in the world, to give people hope. As I was on the last time, in tears, and many people, I looked at the comments as well, suffering in tears as well, but just to hear a breath of fresh air and other people on the same vibe keeps people alive. But the Palestinian people, they're the true people of the world just now. You know, the faith that they've got in the unseen fighting against this unrivaled oppression. And so the university, and as I say, I pay tribute to you and your wife. The lady is Fatima Al-Fidri, and Fez, the first university was built in the world. I mean, hundreds of years before Harvard, years before Oxford, years before the one in Italy, in Bologna, and it became a place where people would come and learn, and later on maybe tell all these people. But one great who passed away 4 years ago in terrible circumstances, and the place where the Zionist entity is taken is really despicable. But Haj Qasem Soleimani, what a guy he was for just stopping the ISIS, the Daesh movement that was there, for saving the world, and we massacred them. And for the person on hunger strike, please desist. I'm in a partial hunger strike myself. I've been eating one meal a day and bringing, you don't have to eat as much as we do. We don't have to consume. And yeah, it's hard to eat, but as Haj Qasem Soleimani said to people who were around, don't rush to martyrdom. This fight is long and this fight is hard. We need people who are strong. Yes, don't be afraid of death. Look at the Palestinians, they're not afraid of death. So don't be afraid of death. And for Arobus there, good luck with your fight against the system there. And everybody, whatever fight they've got, thanks for allowing us to come together, George. God bless you. And keep fighting the system, because the terrible oppression, that is upon the world just now, good people yourself, thank God, alhamdulillah, there's nothing that they can do. All praise to God for your show, your listeners, and the people of Palestine. God bless. And can I just say one final thing? See the little incubator babies, if just one of them comes back, let Moses can take down the modern day Pharaoh, God willing, but we should be building in the next generation or two, the Palestine, a Jewish Palestine, a Christian Palestine, a Muslim Palestine, a Palestine for all, a holy land, and we should be building it, because the Zionist entity's days are truly over. For what they're doing now, the whole world is coming together peacefully, and the resistance is fighting them back at some of their own medicine. And God willing, the victors will be the ones on the true path. And thanks for allowing me to spend the time, George, here with you. God bless.
Thank you. What can I say, Tommy, after that? The sheer power of that call has left me breathless. But we're out of time, so I can't respond in the way I would like to. I will on another occasion, Tommy. Thank you. Because there's yet another legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol, who I have to publicly thank for insisting on her £100 donation to the mother of all talk shows. I'm humbled by it, Norma, and I didn't ask you if you wanted me to publicly thank you, but I decided that I really felt obliged to publicly thank you. God bless you. What would you like to say, Norma?
Oh, George, it was just a Christmas present. I'm not that rich, but I thought, well, I was giving all the money away to the family. I might as well give you some. No, quickly, George, because we haven't got time. I'm in a bit of a muddle because if, as you implied earlier, that Israel may have been responsible for October the 7th and not Hamas, why would Hamas have Israeli hostages, which Netanyahu wants releasing? I don't understand that.
No, no. Well, I think you misunderstood what I said. Of course, Hamas and Jihad and PFLP and other resistance organizations, of course, they broke out of the concentration camp on October 7th. And of course, they made war on their occupiers. They fought the Israeli Defense Force. They would call it the Israeli Occupation Force. They may have killed some civilians. I don't know exactly what happened and who killed whom. A significant number of the Palestinian resistance were killed. A very significant number of Israelis and foreigners in Israel were also killed. But they weren't all killed by the Palestinian resistance. As is now clear, very substantial numbers, the exact number we do not know yet, but we will. Very substantial numbers of the Israelis who were killed on October 7th were killed by the Israeli armed forces from the air and from the land. We know that the car park at the music festival was devastated from the air by Israeli attack helicopters. We know that. We've got footage of it. And we know from testimony after testimony, I've lost track now of the number of Israeli soldiers who've now appeared on Israeli TV explaining how they were ordered by their officers to destroy houses and the people in them. Hostages, potential hostages. They were ordered to destroy them so that they could not be taken to the Gaza Strip as prisoners of the Palestinian resistance. Now, I don't know if it's half or a quarter or 3/4 or 10% or 80%. I don't know that. I'm not pretending to know that. But Israeli media is racking up the number of people who were in fact killed under this Operation Hannibal directive written by Benjamin Netanyahu, determined to avoid any more Israeli hostages being held by the resistance and traded for large numbers of Palestinian political prisoners. They were determined under Operation Hannibal that even if it cost the lives of hundreds or thousands of Israelis, they were not going to allow them to be taken prisoner if they could possibly avoid it. So I'm not, of course, saying that all or most or many of the Israeli casualties on October 7th were killed by Israelis. I cannot quantify it, but I do know that a significant number of Israelis who were killed on October 7th were in fact killed by the Israeli military themselves. I wish I had time to go on. I'm already 6 minutes over, but I can't. But the good news is, God willing, I'm back on Sunday at the earlier time of 7 p.m. UK time. So I only have time to dedicate this show to one of the greatest journalists and broadcasters and filmmakers in the whole world who passed away this week. May God rest John Pilger, the great journalist whose life has ended, but whose work will live forevermore. Thanks for watching.